You have 10 minutes, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Estei. So the topic of this discussion is living in the shadow of the euro crisis. And as the topic says, actually being in the shadow is not very pleasant always, but even more these days when the Eurozone is faced with some really big challenges. I will speak mostly about the countries that are affected by this Eurozone crisis, but actually are not member of the Eurozone and not even member of the European Union. So these are countries in the Balkan region, several of them which share the same destiny and have more or less the same characteristics of the economy. So what are the transmission channels that transfer this crisis in the Eurozone to our countries? First, it's the trade channel, because we are closely related to the European Union. For my country, Macedonia, 70% of our export is going to the European Union. If we take that additional 20% of our export is going to the neighboring countries, which on their side are export-oriented to the European Union, then we can see that more or less 90% of our export is directly or indirectly connected to the destiny and to the trends in the Eurozone and the European Union more in general. So having this crisis and this slowdown, almost recession in the Eurozone and European Union, it's not surprising that we face with quite sluggish economic growth this year. In most of the countries it's close to zero. Fortunately, we don't expect a negative growth, but we are in some steady situation which is not very plausible, having in mind the low levels of our economic development. Another channel is financial market channel, and you all know that international financial markets are quite tight these days. In some periods they relax a little bit, but then again when there is some peak of discussions of some tensions in the Eurozone, again the markets close. I would just give one example that in April this year my government made a pre-agreement with several private banks for syndicated loan for 250 million euros, which is not quite high amount, and the rate was quite favorable, relatively favorable. But then in May we had these Greek elections and all these stories that went with Greek elections, and at the beginning of June, when this agreement has to be finalized, most of the banks that participated in this syndicated loan already gave up because the risks increased on the international markets. The uncertainty was very high, what will happen. So then the government was not able to raise this amount. Just one bank stayed, just 75 million euros, and the rest had to be provided on domestic market, which fortunately is liquid at the moment. So this was not a problem to provide, but at the price of the private sector. Third channel could be the banking channel. Majority of the banks in the region are owned by European Union banks. Some are quite big global players, but most are regional, strong regional players. Austrian banks, Greek banks, Italian banks. These are the major players in these banking markets. And in this situation, when the banks in Greece have other problems, banks in Italy, in Austria, they have a global strategy to deleverage. They don't distinguish between the markets. So they don't say, okay, in Serbia, in Albania, in Macedonia, maybe we have space to grow. So their general strategy is, let's deleverage. And therefore, their subsidiaries must follow this strategy, although they rely, for example, in my country, banks rely mostly on domestic deposits. They don't rely on their parent banks for financing. Loan-to-deposit ratio is 90%, so still there is room for credit expansion. The economy is in such state that risks are not so high, but because of the global strategy of the parent banks, they just stop lending, and it affects the real sector of the economy. Then these Basel III standards, the new Basel regulation, which banks gradually start to implement and take into account in their calculations of their coefficients, liquidity coefficients, capital adequacy, it could have huge impact. For example, liquidity requirements that are introduced with Basel III require that as liquid assets are considered only placements in government bonds with certain credit rating, and no country in the region is having investment grade credit rating. So the consequence could be that all subsidiaries of these banks could go out of the local bond markets, sovereign bond markets. And this already happened in Albania, for example. Raiffeisen this year had to go out of the local sovereign bond markets, and this was a tremendous hit on the financing of Albanian government. So I could imagine what could happen if banks in Macedonia, which are subsidiaries of Austrian banks, of Italian, of Greek banks, have to go out of government bills, government bonds, and central bank bills, because the main policy instrument of our central bank is the central bank bills, 28 days central bank bills. So if this is not eligible to be considered as liquid under this Basel III criteria, this will be this will ruin the whole monetary policy, the main pillar of our monetary policy. So in such situation, we would have to look what further, what will be our main policy instrument, how we will set our monetary policy. So these are great challenges at this time. And not to talk about the withdrawal of capital, not in the banking sector, because we have ring-fenced our banking sector. For example, foreign banks cannot, actually domestic banks, cannot expose to their parent banks more than 10% of their capital, and this is a good provision this time, so there cannot be outflow of capital from domestic banks to